We live in a time when our idea of community is frayed, strained due to our busy lives, challenged by the political landscape and competing responsibilities. Some of us believe that getting involved will not change anything. Fortunately, however, there are many people in our community who are doing something about the conditions in which we live. This program, The Power of One, will show you that one person can make a difference and that the power of one is within all of us. Welcome to The Power of One. Today, my guest is Adam Hartel. Thank you very much for being here, and thanks for taking the time out of your creative day at No Future Cafe.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are unfamiliar with No Future Cafe, and that's where I wanted to start. We'll get into a little bit about how you got there later, but what is it and how does it operate?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a story behind that. So No Future Cafe started in 1993 as a weekly music event that was kind of a venue, and it's evolved over the years. So currently, what it is it's expanded beyond the music. It's expanded into different forms of common interest, whether that be gaming nights, video game tournaments, art and creative nights. So it's really, in a lot of ways, a community hub. We want to expand our relationships with the community and with other really, community changer type people, so that it would become a hub for that and kind of a community center, sort of a DIY community center, if you will. So yeah, we're located at 1500 East Walnut in Pasadena, California, and we're in the building that was Sang's Inn ages ago. And
is there still some Chinese food on the floor?
No, in fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, they shut down for about a year for full-on renovations. They got
right.
I wasn't there at the time, but they got a grant, and so brand new floor, brand new carpet.
Yeah, it's a beautiful facility now. So, it seems like a church. Often churches are relatively inwardly focused. Why would a church like yours decide to not only create a space like this, but then try to populate it with creative young people, but people who are not a part of the church? What's in it for the church? Yeah,
well, without getting into a long history lesson, I'd say a lot of the formation of the Western church has come out of a little bit more of a kind of a colonialism type of a model, or even when the church was the religion of empire. Starting in the ages of Constantine. So it was almost like this thing of establishing something, indoctrinating people, and sort of expanding that front. But in a nutshell, I would say that I find that the teachings of Jesus are much more about being out in the community for the common good, for the health and benefit of mankind. So the motivation of the church actually came through a handful of college students in 1993. That went to the lead pastor of the church at the time, Reverend Ralph Torres.
Oh, so it was a request.
It was a request. It actually came from the community. So some of those college students were in the church. Some of them were from the city of Pasadena. Majority of them were musicians. And at the time, about 1993, there was no really strong live music venue for them to get on a stage and rally a community that were enthusiastic about the music. So they went to the lead pastor. And they said, look, we have volunteers, we have people who want to do something. You own this former restaurant building that we know is sort of a multi-purpose building on the campus. We'd like to start doing something. We're just wondering if we could have permission to use the space and then bring in the bands and those kind of things. Yeah,
and what's interesting, though, that in over 20 years since then, there really isn't any other location like this, is there, that I'm aware of in Pasadena?
Yeah, I mean, in the essence that in a lot of ways it really is a DIY venue. The word cafe is in the name, but it's not a restaurant. It's not a business because it started up in the 90s and was named in the 90s. Everything in the 90s was a cafe. But
a lot of cafes.
Yeah, and one thing about the name, a lot of people today ask me why No Future isn't that negative. That sounds kind of dark. Well, it was named by a bunch of Gen Xers who loved, the Sex Pistols song No Future. And it was sort of this kind of sticking it to the man sort of a thing of saying, our generation is sort of branded as saying, they can't really offer us a future. And the generation itself, we felt in the midst of the Cold War, there really wasn't a future for us.
Well, there was a feeling that there wasn't going to be a future.
Right,
it was very fatalistic.
So actually,
thermonuclear war puts a damper on hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name was kind of tongue-in-cheek. It was like, well, no, we actually are going to do something. about our future, we're going to make an investment. Yeah.
Yeah, so thinking about, and I want to talk to you more about the neighborhood too, but maybe just another little clarification. What would you still like to be doing with the center? What is, you have so many activities going on there, but what else would you like to add? What do you think would round it out even more?
I think, well, I mean, sort of my mantra with what we do is community through common interest. So even the way that the initiative was started.
Well, talk about common interest a little more. What is that?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you have a point of common interest, let's say for a moment that's music, which is the way that was started. If you have a common point of interest as music, you can get people that are interested in music that have never met each other before from vastly different backgrounds, but if they enjoy the same art form, then they form a bond, they form a connection over something. Then if you can do something together around that common interest, for example, put on a concert together, now you've built a story together. So now that story starts to form a culture and lends itself to community. So when those two individuals, or 4 or 5 or 10, see each other around their larger community, they see a person that not only has a story and a background, but they see a person that has a shared story. And you've got that, remember when we. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's kind of a warm feeling inside of you. The endorphins start to go. You feel more comfortable. But why is that? I mean, do you see that in our society that's lacking, or what? You know?
I think. I mean, we'll probably get into the European conversation later, but I think both, primarily in the West, there's sometimes this attitude that, you know, government is responsible for social action or programs, and those programs are supposed to meet our needs. But I think through a combination of that and just some of the natural isolation that occurred through modernity, postmodernism, the way we live our lives, in a lot of ways, society has lost the art of neighboring. And so we need to find ways to take, for myself as an individual living on my street, how do I begin to take a sense of responsibility for my street, even if that responsibility is to go out of my way to say hello to the person that lives across the way from me.
Yeah, and let's talk about your street for a little while. What does it mean to be a neighbor on Harkness, and how is neighboring manifested there?
Yeah, Harkness is a really interesting little street. It's a very short street, connects Walnut to Colorado.
Yeah, there's not even a South Harkness. It's just, just Harkness.
That's it. It's about one city block.
Yeah.
So that street, I don't know the exact number of inhabitants, but because we've got apartment buildings mixed with privately owned homes, condos, it goes deep. So there's a lot of folks that live on that street. And that ranges anywhere from people that have been there for many, many years as residents that own a home, to renters, to college students. And neighboring on Harkness, I think, begins with finding each other. And so we have a group of neighbors on Harkness that have found each other and are starting to find ways to find more of the neighbors. And one example would be we rallied together around one of the proactive, not a complaint, but a proactive remark that came up from one of our neighbors who said, you know, the street's really dirty because we have all this through traffic. But rather than complaining about it, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to start picking up the trash. Well, that inspired other neighbors. And so we actually formed an event, actually with your help and Collaborate Pasadena. We brought a large group of the neighbors together to get out and clean the street together. But we did it as a party, as a social event, and we finished knowing each other better than we did before we started.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating. You were alluding to the challenges of neighboring, and to be honest, your street is one of the most challenging because it doesn't have kind of a homogeneous nature of housing. There's so many different types of housing, from, you know, even people who have purchased a condo, but then live in an enclosed building where they lock the door first to the building, then they lock the door to their own unit. So a lot of walls that go up. So I'm wondering about since you did live in Europe for a while, what you've observed between neighboring there, or I would also call it community building. So community building, Europe style, or at least in the countries you lived, and then what goes on here. Yeah.
So in 2002, my wife and I, we moved to Norway, where we lived for 8 years. And then we eventually moved from Norway to Amsterdam, Netherlands, where we lived for 5 years. And we were working with local churches to help bridge the gap between church and community and add value to the community. So what we discovered in Norway is still very homogenous, culturally, historically. In European cities or towns, because they've been around for centuries, you've got families that have known each other forever. But what we found in Norway was good neighboring was about, Norwegians were good at it. I mean, they'd spend time with each other, but bridging the gap to the other, maybe the immigrant or the one who is different. That's the growth edge for neighboring in a culture like that.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of romanticism about small towns and the fact that people take care of each other more in a small town. Do you think that that's just sort of a kind of a myth, or do you think that that actually happens?
No, I mean, living in Norway, I watched it happen before my eyes. Now it stayed within particular ethnic groupings or that sort of a thing, but you did have neighbors making it their point to know one another, and even crossing the boundaries. And if one neighbor had a big gardening project to do, or they were taking down a tree that would improve sunlight coming to the rest of the property, the other neighbors would go over and say, hey, we're going to help you with this because we're going to benefit from this too. Norwegians were they haven't lost that yet, I guess I should say. Amsterdam was entirely different. Amsterdam was...
Well, it's a big city. It's
a big city, but it's been cosmopolitan before there was a cosmopolitan.
It
was postmodern for centuries before postmodern was even a thing.
Yeah, because they were traders and they were all over the...
70 to 80 different ethnic groups. Tolerance was the high value, but the challenge with tolerance is it's not the same thing as love. Tolerance says, as long as you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you.
And we're just fine.
Yeah, but you can't dance. You can't do community when you're sort of in this gilded cage of don't rock the boat. So we found in Amsterdam that some of those challenges were very similar to what we face in Harkness, in the sense that here you have a private property owner that says, I need my street to be clean. I need my front yard to be respected. And then you've got a bunch of tenants in an apartment building adjacent who they just come and go. That's where they sleep. There's a different level of care. So getting those neighbors not to just complain about each other, but to find one another, to find a common interest and actually do something together.
So would you say your secret sauce or your recipe for that kind of community building is finding a common interest? Or is there more to it?
I mean, I wouldn't say that it's the only way. For me, it's definitely a way that I've found because people have interests. That common interest may be as simple as the street is dirty. Or the common interest could be, we're massive Star Wars nerds. It could be that kind of a range. So I think what we want to do is to cultivate a sense of creativity and freedom in people to notice those common interests. And for the personal benefit that I'm going to receive of getting to know another enthusiast, I'm able to reach out, bridge that gap, and find an ally.
Yeah, something that I've found that's been challenging, and I was wondering what your insight is on, is maintaining that energy or maintaining that connectedness. So it's not that it's easy, but to get people to come out for a cleanup day is pretty straightforward. But after the cleanup day is over, or after the parade is over, or after the block party is over, the annual one that everybody looks forward to, how do you maintain closeness? How do you maintain kind of that fabric of caring?
Two things that I've noticed that really help with that are the reason why we had the cleanup day to begin with is sort of the catalysts in that community had started to surface. So it wasn't someone who wasn't cleaning up the street going away and saying, I'm going to organize this thing, let's see, we'll call it a cleanup day. There was a sense of noticing someone who was an outlier in the community, bridging that gap already, and moving towards, so building on strengths, moving towards existing momentum, because then he's going to become enthusiastic about what he or she are doing. The other one is consistency. So sometimes when we try to execute really huge events, it's very hard to sustain consistency. But if you can do something simple, you can be consistent with that. You can have weekly contact, those kinds of things.
There's another neighborhood association in town, actually several, but one, and they're pretty, I hate to use the word religious, but they're pretty dedicated to being consistent. And what I like about their consistency is that it's a series of relatively small activities. So they have a cookie exchange. They get the kids out for Halloween. They do maybe these rotating parties around the neighborhood. But each month there is something going on so that it brings people together, and there is kind of a constant touch and warmth. Another sort of angle that I wanted to find out from you, I know that there are several or some social issues on your block because it is semi-urban sort of a landscape. So how has the church and then No Future Cafe, how have you guys dealt with issues like homelessness in your neighborhood? Yeah.
I could share a brief story that sort of encapsulates that, because we don't have a program for the homeless, even in the church. In that sense, we have other things that we do, but we're not equipped for that in that way. But that also doesn't let us off the hook.
Well, it shouldn't let any of us off the hook.
Right. But that gets back to the thing of, well, the government should take care of it.
Right.
And I believe
someone else.
Yeah, the government should be doing the government's job. But I mean, I speak with people from government that are saying, please, private citizens, do something. So, oh gosh, it was nearly 2 years ago now. Actually, we were even in the midst of in the church, there was a prayer gathering that was happening. And literally the prayer that was being prayed was, sort of show us some guidance for the next year. Show us how we can have a touch in our community. And into that gathering walks a homeless woman. And she comes in and takes some shelter from the rain. And
right at that moment?
During that meeting, she's there. So
kind of like she knew.
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we were somehow so amazing that but I mean, we decided we sort of said maybe this is an answer to that prayer. And so she started camping out on the front steps and whatnot, which could have been seen as a big inconvenience and run her off. But rather than just sort of saying, well, we need you to go off and just go, let the police handle you, or let whatever thing is out there, service that's out there handle you, which she wasn't going to engage anyway at that point. We made it a conversation and a relationship. And it really was my sister-in-law, who's the lead pastor of the church right now, together with a few others, that it's the attitude of not seeing someone as a demographic, but seeing them as a human being. And learn. I think that's what neighboring comes from. If I just see a demographic, I can't be their neighbor.
Well, that's what neighboring should be.
Right. So it was a costly but also wonderful long-term relationship of working together with her and making it a conversation and a point of care where she could be, where we could provide care, that eventually, rather than just complaining and having the police take her away in handcuffs, she was able to come to a point finally where she was able to say, yes, I want help, and I'm willing to go to the such and such for help. So folks from that initiative were able to come and lovingly bring her to that location and bring her belongings, rather than another agency of the city forcefully moving her there. And that we continue to have folks come through, because we're kind of a throughway in the city. So I think we as neighbors, we try to do our best to look out for and to provide care for, but also to care for one another. And I think that could be a key, is if I know that my neighbor is watching out for me and I'm watching out for them, I might be willing to take a risk to speak with someone who is the other, whether they're a homeless person or someone that's not from our block, and say, are you okay?
Yeah, well, one of the easiest, unfortunately, one of the tendencies that we have, especially in our society, is to consider that person as the other, or to dehumanize them in some way, shape, or form. So ultimately, it gives us a pass. It gives us the license, if you will, to not treat them as anything valuable. Well, because if in our mind, they aren't related to us, we don't know them,
Yeah.
you know, they're just some other guy, then I don't have to do anything.
But nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to treat someone or dehumanize someone in the way that I treat them today. I think we're perpetuating something that has formed us through society. We are constantly dehumanized through marketing, through, we're monetized, those kind of things. So we have a certain amount of social pain that is inflicted on us, and if that doesn't get healed, we perpetuate it. One of the ways of healing it is to do something. Right. Through kindness, through gratitude, those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right that every day we're bombarded with messages that you aren't really worth much of anything. So
or you're just worth this product being sold to you.
Yeah. Well, and you'll be better for it if you actually buy that product. Yeah. But that I think is where the conundrum is. That's where I think the real challenge is. If our society is wrapped around, let's say, screens, and we're inwardly focused, and so you go into your house and you close your door and your garage door shuts and you lock the windows and everything, and then you just watch television, it's kind of hard for you to feel the warmth of neighboring or building community. Yeah. So everything you're doing, and that's one reason why I wanted you on the show, is that I feel like the community hub aspect of No Future Cafe is breaking people out of that. So instead of in isolation,
in an unforceful, loving sort of way.
Well, no, and in an inviting way. Right. It's actually an attraction.
It's more about attraction than it is about promotion. Yeah.
So instead of having kind of the man or woman who is an artist who just wants to draw or paint or whatever, instead of having them in isolation, maybe in some apartment building way down the street on Harkness, you actually say, "Come, y'all come, and let's draw together."
Right, and you can still be an introvert in that setting too. It's okay. No one's going to push you, but the idea of collective energy,
Yeah, but you're an introvert among other introverts. Yes. Or an introvert among or friends, so you're accepted for who you are. So how did this like epiphany come to you?
I don't know. It just, in a lot of ways, when I was in my early 20s, I was going to college, I was a patron of No Future Cafe. And I was in some of the bands that played there. So I actually became a part of the spiritual community at Pasadena Foursquare because I liked what I saw at No Future Cafe. Yeah. Now, I was already a practicing Christian. I was studying to become a minister, but I didn't really like this sort of salesman-y stigma that was associated with ministers or with missionaries or those sorts of things. And what I saw happening there in the 90s, I said, now this is something that I can align my personal faith with. And so I was really formed by that. So I watched a lot of that happening there. I went to Europe and experimented with some of those ideas and learned more.
Yeah, and I just feel like you've taken it to another level. I mean, I think that the space was there, and it was functioning and it was doing wonderful things. But I think you've ratcheted it up about 10 levels.
I don't know how much credit I can take for that, except that maybe being in Europe for 13 years has made me odd enough that, like, I do something really weird on my street that I don't see a lot of people doing. In the morning, especially when it's nice, I sit on my front porch. Because that's what you do in Europe.
Right. We don't do that here.
And I see all my neighbors go to work. I see all my neighbors up and moving
around. And you wave, right?
When I can.
Yeah, or when you have the opportunity.
Yeah, when I have the opportunity. But you start to recognize faces. Yeah. And you begin to, because a lot of us don't even know who lives around us. Yeah. We wouldn't recognize them if we saw them.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, although I'd love to talk to you longer. But could you tell a story of some impact of whether it's the sketch night or it's the art night or even the music night? Tell us a story about what you've observed and how it's changed people's lives.
Yeah, I'll do that, and I'll try to make it brief because I would like to just really briefly share kind of what's happening.
Oh yeah.
I know future before we close, but maybe we can link it back to my friend Tommy because he's just sort of become this common thread. I got to know Tommy when I was literally going door to door as a neighbor to my neighbors with a simple flyer along with my sister-in-law Brita, and we were saying we want to get our neighbors together. And so we met Tommy coming out of his house, and he just he was like, this is great, this is what we need to do, I love
Right.
this. He was really enthusiastic.
Right.
And I was like, well, hey, that's great, I can't wait to see you there. So he shows up, and the story I told earlier is what happened. We wanted to come together not around complaint, but around common interest for good.
Yeah.
You know? So he says, I'll go clean the streets. So Tommy goes out and cleans the streets, and I'm getting to know him now because every morning he's in front of my house. I'm coming home from driving my kids to school, and we stop and talk. So through getting to know him, I found out he's also a musician. And so, you know, I said, well, why don't you come play one of the music nights at No Future Cafe? So he comes and he plays. I get to know him more through that, because now we have music as a common bond. He loves the space. He's full of ideas. Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. So we just build this relationship. And then he phones me maybe a few months later and says, this guy from USC wants to interview me for a podcast. I was wondering if I could do it at No Future, and I wanted you to come and be a part of the podcast. I said, great. So we do it. And I, for the first time, really got to hear him tell his full story. And I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but I will say that what I didn't know about my neighbor at that time was that he moved onto the block about the same time that I did. And he moved onto the block after a very much rock bottom sort of an experience. Yeah. And a turning point for him that he said was coming in contact with his neighbors through this get-together and deciding, rather than just sort of wallowing or in self-defeat or depression, he got out and started cleaning the streets, and then he started playing, and just the encouragement he received through the neighborhood and through playing at No Future Cafe, he's now building his music career. And he said something that I think is one of the best statements that has sort of become one of my prayers, and that is, he said one day, creativity saved my life. Yeah. And I thought, that's just beautiful.
And I think that's what No Future Cafe is all about. So unfortunately, we've run out of time today.
It's fine.
Just in 5 seconds, do you want to say what you're doing?
Monthly music nights, first Friday night of the month. Gaming nights, third Friday night of the month. And every Thursday night from 6 to 9, we're actually launching it publicly this next week. We'll be an open studio for creatives and artists, writers to get together and have 3 hours studio space to create together.
I want to come.
Yeah. So nofuturecafe.org. You can find us. If you follow us on Facebook, you get all the updates. Yeah.
I want to come. I'll be there.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah.
It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.